Hey, so I'm going to show you how to do a pan flush and filter change on a 6R75 transmission that's found in 07 to 2014 Ford Expeditions and F150s and other vehicles. This should be the same process for the 6R60 and 6R80. Those will take a different fluid and possibly a slightly different volume of fluid. To see which transmission you have and to see what kind of fluid it needs, all you need to do is look in the owner's manual near the back. It has all the fluids and all the capacities for everything in your Ford vehicle. So my transmission's 6R75. It takes Mercon SP for the transmission. You don't pay attention to the capacity because that includes the torque converter and everything, and you cannot drain the fluid in the torque converter. There will also be a residual amount of fluid up in the transmission on this 6R75 because there's a valve that opens when the transmission warms up and when it's operating, and lets more fluid flow around, and some fluid is trapped behind that valve. So just don't worry about it. Just do your pan flush and filter change and don't worry about it. So here's what you need to do this job. You need 7 quarts of Mercon SP transmission fluid. You may not use the full 7 quarts. You'll need a transmission filter that fits your transmission. You'll need a fluid pump to pump out the old fluid and pump in the new fluid. You do not need 2 pumps. You'll get cross-contamination in the transmission, so it doesn't really matter that much. You need a 19mm open-end wrench, a 1/4-inch drive ratchet, 8mm socket, some extensions, and a swivel helps a lot, and an 8mm offset wrench like this. A magnetic bowl to put your bolts in is very helpful. I'll be using a drill to zip out the bolts as opposed to the ratchet. You'll also want some nitrile gloves, rags, and a drain basin for the old fluid. And finally, some kind of box to put the transmission fluid in, and this will hold them steady while you're pumping the fluid out of those bottles and into the transmission. First thing that you want to do is get the transmission pan as level as possible. There's the pan. So there's the 19mm plug, which you'll remove, and in there's the dipstick, and you can stick the pump hose in there and pump out all the old fluid that's in the pan. After that, you'll remove all these 8mm bolts that go around the pan, and the pan will come forward and you'll slide it out forward. You don't want to do this when the exhaust is hot. This is the catalytic converter, and you will be bumping your arm against it while you're removing this dipstick cover. There will be a slight vacuum sound as you remove this cover. And that's the dipstick for this transmission. Hold it in your fingers like this. Put your hand up there. Be gentle with it because it's a thin plastic thing. Get your pump into position and start pumping out the fluid. When you put the hose in there, you want to just make sure it taps the bottom of the pan right here in the corner. So that way you know that it hasn't curled up and is sticking straight up and not sucking in any fluid. Because if you do that, you'll have a nice surprise when the pan comes down and all the fluid dumps out. So you want to make sure you're getting out all the fluid that's in the pan, or as much as possible anyway. Now use your 8mm socket and remove all the pan bolts. So these 3 bolts you can get with the extension and swivel. But that corner bolt on the driver's side, you're gonna need the offset 8mm. As you're getting the last bolts out, you want to hold the pan up so it doesn't just flop down. Once those bolts are out, you just tilt it forward a bit, slide it forward. Whoops. Anyway, once you get the pan out, the filter may come with it. It's not very well secured in the transmission. You got a magnet in the back. You want to inspect that for any metal shavings. A little bit's gonna be there, that's okay. As long as there's no big chunks attached to that, then you're good. The gasket is reusable. Wipe it off and reuse it. There's gonna be a little fluid left in the pan. Drain that out, wipe the pan out, and then we'll put everything back together. Now my transmission is high mileage. This pan is pretty dirty, as you can see. Fluid wasn't maintained by the previous owner. I've done a pan flush once before. I did not change the filter that time because I wanted to make sure before I spent all that money that change in the fluid wouldn't actually cause the transmission to stop working. And everything was good, so just drove it for a while until I was ready to do this again. Here's a link to a previous video where I have a torque converter shutter on this transmission and I fixed it. So there's a quick look at the old valve body. So the filter goes into that hole there and the new filter just presses in there and that's how it's held in. It should hang there. It might fall down. You might want to get the pan ready to put back on very quickly. Torque the pan bolts to 106 inch-pounds and then you're ready to pump in the new fluid. Got 5 quarts in and it's starting to come out the transmission already. I'm gonna start it up, let the fluid pump around in the transmission, fill up the filter, and I'll pump more fluid into it. Then for the final fluid level adjustment, you'll want to bring the transmission up to operating temperature, go drive it around or whatever. And then with the vehicle as level as possible, and with the engine idling, and with the transmission in park, of course, you'll pull out this dipstick. And the fluid should be within this hashed area. If it's above, you'll remove some fluid. If it's below, you'll add some fluid. And look, the dipstick literally says, check hot idling in park. Also shows you the type of fluid to use. Use only Mercon SP. Then once your fluid level is good, seal it back up and you're good to go. That would also be a good time to check around your freshly installed transmission pan and make sure it's not leaking anywhere at the gasket.